Peace, love, liberty, radio.
And the walls come crashing down as the war at home reaches your town. You have no choice, it's safe and clean. We all submit to the war machine.
The next time you go to a restaurant and it's somebody's birthday, you should not have to worry that they're going to come out and sing some ridiculous knockoff version of the happy birthday song, hopefully for your sake and everyone at your party or at your table. Hopefully they will come out and sing happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. Do you know why that should happen? Because there's no longer a fear that they will wind up getting hit with a copyright infringement lawsuit. Again, hopefully that happens. There was a court decision a couple of days ago out of California. And, well, the federal judge in Los Angeles ruled that none of the companies that have collected royalties on the happy birthday song for the past 80 years held a valid copyright claim to the song Happy Birthday to You. The decision, again, it came out earlier this week, on Tuesday to be exact. A federal judge in Los Angeles, in a stunning reversal of decades of copyright claims, the judge ruled that Warner/Chappell never had the right to charge for the use of Happy Birthday to You. Warner had been enforcing a copyright claim since 1988 when it bought Birch Tree Group, the successor to Clayton F. Summy Company, which claimed the original disputed copyright. Judge George H. King ruled that a copyright filed by the Summy Company in 1935 granted only the right to specific piano arrangements of the music, not the actual song. Randall Newman, an attorney for the plaintiffs in the suit, which included a group of filmmakers who are producing a documentary about the song, said Happy Birthday is finally free after 80 years. Finally, the charade is over. It's unbelievable. A spokesman for the company claiming to own the song said, "We're looking at the court's lengthy opinion and considering our options." The plaintiff's attorneys had characterized the years-long legal fight as a David versus Goliath battle that pitted independent filmmakers against a large corporation collecting profits on a song whose authors had long since died. Until now, Warner had asked for royalties from anyone who wanted to sing or play Happy Birthday to You with the lyrics as part of a profit-making enterprise. Royalties were most often collected from stage productions, television shows, movies, or greeting cards, but even those who wanted to sing the song publicly as part of a business, say a restaurant owner giving out free birthday cakes to patrons, technically had to pay to use the song, prompting creative renditions at chain eateries trying to avoid paying royalties. The fact that the birthday tune can't be played or sung without permission from Warner had been little more than a surprising piece of trivia for most, but for Warner Music Group, it meant big business. Two of the filmmaker plaintiffs paid $1,500 and $3,000 for the rights to use the song, according to their attorneys. Filmmaker Steve James paid Warner $5,000 to use the song in his 1994 documentary, Hoop Dreams. Now, before I continue with the article, I just want to interject here and ask the question, now that the copyright has been deemed by a court to be invalid, will Warner Music Group be required to reimburse the people whom they have collected fees from? So the filmmaker that paid $5,000, will he get $5,000? Will he receive a $5,000 check from Warner Music Group for basically what amounts to extortion, theft, if you will? Theft by deception, I believe, is the appropriate term, although I would have to check the California statutes. But I know when I lived in Pennsylvania, there was a thing called theft by deception in Pennsylvania, meaning that you're not necessarily intending to steal an item, but you wind up essentially depriving the owner of the item. And in this case, essentially, you have Warner Music Group saying, we own the copyright, you have to give us money to be able to use the song. But in point of fact, they did not own the copyright, so they were, at the very least, committing fraud to wind up getting money. And fraud is illegal. That's a crime. You're depriving someone of the fruits of their labor through fraud. And that would not stand up, or rather should not stand up. The filmmaker Steve James wrote in an email passed along by his publicist, quote, "It was quite expensive for us at the time and with our budget, and we only used it for 9 seconds. He had to pay $5,000 for 9 seconds of audio. That is absolutely ridiculous." However, he said the scene was essential to the film and ultimately decided to pay the fee. At a March hearing in the case, records show that Warner Chappell representatives seated in the audience told the judge that the company collects as much as 6 figures for certain single uses of the song. The song brings in about $2 million in royalties for Warner, according to some estimates. The complex saga of the 8-note ditty had spanned more than 120 years, withstanding 2 world wars and several eras of copyright law. The song has seen the rise and fall of vinyl records, cassette tapes, CDs, and now the era of digital streaming music. The article here in the midst says, for the record, September 23rd, 2:18 p.m., an earlier version of the article said Happy Birthday is a 6-note song. It's actually an 8-note song. They then continue. The story began in 1893 when a Kentucky schoolteacher and her older sister, Patty Smith Hill, and Mildred J. Hill, wrote the song for Patty's kindergarten students, titling it Good Morning to All. The original lyrics Patty wrote were, "Good morning to you, good morning to you, good morning, dear children, good morning to all." Patty later said she had worked with her sister to compose a simple melody to match the words that could be easily sung by young children. The sisters published the song in a book called Song Stories for the Kindergarten and assigned the copyright to the publisher, Clayton F. Summy Company, in exchange for a cut of the sales. That was only the beginning of the tangled web of copyright laws various attorneys have argued may or may not apply to one of the world's most famous songs. Well, now it is basically settled that Happy Birthday is not copywritten. I will post a link to this article in the show notes. You can finish the article at your leisure. And I've got other news to jump into, including that 40% of Americans want a wall with Canada.
During the 2013 Porcupine Freedom Festival, Davi Barker presented an idea for a renegade psychological experiment. Since then, he has refined his idea and put his plan and research into writing. He explains, "We aim to show the world beyond a shadow of a doubt that power corrupts absolutely and corrupt authority deserves no obedience." Authoritarian Sociopathy is available from Amazon.com, all major bookstores, and now available as an audiobook.
It is the year 91,001 BCE. Witness humanity's origins in Hyperchronius, a classic role-playing game for Windows PCs with a story like no other game before. The liberty-oriented experience that is not to be missed. Go to ZOG.ninja to get your copy of Hypercronius today. Use the code FPP to get $1 off. Hypercronius, ZOG.ninja, code FPP.
You can support FPP Radio by shopping online. Whether you're looking for precious metals, bitcoins, or books, you'll find that and more at shop.fppradio.com. Every purchase you make from one of my affiliates, like Namecheap, ExpressCoin, and Amazon, at shop.fppradio.com helps fund FPP Radio. Or you can shop directly from FPP with Bitcoin in the Bitcoin store. That's shop.fppradio.com.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry. Online at fppradio.com.
Yeah, you heard me right. 41% of Americans want a wall on the Canadian border. That's actually the same percentage of Americans, according to a survey from Bloomberg, that want a wall, a quote-unquote brick and mortar wall on the U.S.-Mexican border as well. The article here comes from Vice. Illegal immigrants scare the poop out of Americans. Well, a large part of that fear is usually directed at Mexico. A poll released by Bloomberg on Thursday found that a growing number of U.S. citizens don't really trust our neighbors to the north either. But before I continue, I just want to point out one thing that I thought was kind of funny that I saw on Facebook, where somebody said, yeah, I don't trust those Canadians with their random use of the letter U in words. And for some reason, whenever I think of Canada, I think of the movie Strange Brew and the Great White North, the McKenzie brothers, Bob and Doug McKenzie, and their quest for cheap beer. It's a hilarious movie. If you've never seen it, I highly recommend it. It's from like the early 80s. It had Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas. Not the Wendy's guy. There's an actor named Dave Thomas. That guy, the actor, and Rick Moranis. Strange Brew, hilarious movie. But nonetheless, let me continue with the article. In the survey, 41% of people questioned said we should build a brick and mortar wall between the U.S. and Mexico. And while we're at it, let's put one along the Canadian border, too. It's a line of logic that Scott Walker, who recently dropped out of the Republican presidential race, expressed interest in before closing his campaign on Monday. Jorge Ramos did a pretty good job of unpacking why the idea of building a wall, a physical wall along the U.S.-Mexico border, doesn't make any sense. And Vice links over to that article. I'll post the link as well in the show notes. And a U.S.-Canada wall doesn't really make sense either. Customs and Border Protection estimates the cost of constructing a wall would be $16 million per mile. $16 million per mile. At that rate, it would cost more than $60 billion, that's billion with a B, to board up the 3,987 miles that the U.S. shares with Canada. And I think the U.S.-Canadian border is actually longer than that once you include Alaska. I could be wrong on that. I will fact-check myself here in just a moment. The article from Vice continues. Still, according to Bloomberg's survey, 4 in 10 Americans are prepared to do whatever it takes to keep foreigners from robbing us and our precious jobs, no matter what end of the border they're pouring in from. A 73-year-old Trump supporter, and I know this because I went to the Bloomberg article where they gave the age of the guy as well as the name. Vice does not mention his name. They don't mention the age. I just happen to recall that he's 73. He says if you cut off one, they're going to come in the other. It's desolate up there in some places on the Canadian border, and they've got to do something up there to stop them from coming in. them, I'm assuming he means Mexicans, but I don't really know. The guy's basically talking about the quote-unquote illegals, which most people wind up attributing to be Mexican. But in point of fact, there are actually some Chinese immigrants who come into the United States illegally, and there's an ocean, an entire ocean, not just a river, not a wall, but an ocean between the U.S. and China, but people still find a way to sneak in from China. And, you know, if you're trying to keep people out of the United States from Mexico, I would not worry about them making their way to Canada to then come in if it's too dangerous to wind up crossing the border there in like Arizona or Texas or New Mexico or California. Because it makes no sense. Why would you take a boat from Mexico all the way around the coast, up the coast, to Canada, and then come across in the middle of nowhere in the Canadian wilderness, when you could, that boat that you're on, and you're going up, you know, presumably the Pacific Ocean, because it would not make a lot of sense to sell a boat from, you know, the Caribbean side of Mexico up the East Coast and then land in the maritime provinces and then come across. That doesn't make sense. But if you're doing this for some weird reason, if you're taking a boat from Mexico to try to sneak into Canada to then sneak into the U.S., why don't you just dock the boat somewhere in the middle of nowhere in California or Oregon? Because there's a lot of places between, you know, or in California and Oregon and Washington where there's not a lot of people. So you could land that boat pretty much anywhere. But, you know, logic does not seem to really be the strong point of a lot of the people that are supporting Donald Trump and the people that were supporting Scott Walker and some of these weird, idiotic things of building a wall on the Canadian border. I don't care if it costs $60 billion. You can just print the money. And I've actually heard people wind up saying stuff like that of you can print the money. And I'm fact-checking myself right now. And, yes, the border actually is longer than the figure that was provided here, the 3,987 miles. But the border length includes a lot of water. So there's a lot of water in the Great Lakes that there's no land there. So unless these people that are supporting building the wall want to build basically what equates to a giant dam through the middle of the Great Lakes, then yes, it would be a 3,987-mile wall, not a 5,525-mile long wall. So the people wanting to build a wall, it makes no sense to me. But one thing that I find interesting is if you look at studies and these surveys that happen a lot, you sort of note some trends, and a lot of times it seems that you can pretty much always find between 30 to 50% of people, or sometimes more, to agree to almost any question at all. So Gallup did a survey, Bloomberg did the survey, found 41% of Americans want to build this wall with Canada and also a wall with Mexico, you know, to keep them out. Ironically enough, the Berlin Wall was also built to, quote-unquote, keep them out. It was the anti-fascist rampart, meaning that we're building this wall to keep out the fascists. We're building this to protect you. We're not building it to keep you in. We're building it to keep them out. But I want to tell you about a survey from Gallup in just a moment here on Peace, Love, Liberty Radio.
Hey, this is Michael Dean from the Freedom Fiends radio show. I've been working with computer programmer Derek Slopey to create Fiend Phone. I'm using Fiend Phone right now to talk with and record one of my co-hosts in real time. Take it, Davi.
Hey, this is Davi Barker, and I'm 1,000 miles away from Michael, but we sound like we're in the same room.
We sure do, Davi. So, Davi, please tell the nice people more about Fiend Phone.
Fiend Phone is free, open-source software that opens up a global world of possibilities for collaborative, high-quality remote voice media production, and I'm digging it.
People can try the Windows beta version of Fiend Phone right now at fiendphone.com. But we're also raising money to vastly improve Fiend Phone and vastly improve independent talk media worldwide.
So go to fiendphone.com to help out. Who will build the audio roads? We will, with your help.
That's fiendphone.com. FEENPHONE.com. Foxtrot, Echo, November, phone.com.
Fiend Phone. I never knew remote audio could be this good.
When her plush and comfy life suddenly and unexpectedly fell apart, Brooke and her dog Cloud set out to defy the odds. If this is a man's world, as they say, living on the streets is no place for a young woman. One day she awoke in the redwood forest and realized she had become a hobo, and would ultimately come to know exactly what it means to survive. How to Be a Hobo by Brooke Willett is available from Amazon.com and all major bookstores.
You're listening to Peace, Love, Liberty Radio with Darryl W. Perry.
So before I tell you about the survey from Gallup and what was, I don't know if discovered is the right term, but their findings, before I tell you about the findings from Gallup, I want to make sure that I tell you about Liberty.me. It's sort of the social network to end all social networks, only no social networks have really ended because of it. But Liberty.me, it's more than just a social network. It's got, I would say, the best parts of the internet minus the porn and the gambling all in one place. So there's the social networking aspect where you can post statuses, share links, comment on other people's statuses. There are groups you can join. There's also chat rooms and forums, which you don't really find on social networking. And there's also ebooks that you can download. There are podcasts, and you can even have your own publishing site connected to your profile there on Liberty.me. Check it out. Use referral code FPP Radio. Save 10% on your registration to Liberty.me. Referral code FPP Radio. So Gallup recently did a survey and found that 49% of Americans who were surveyed say that the federal government poses an immediate threat to the rights and freedoms of ordinary citizens. When they first asked the question in 2003, only 30% agreed that the federal government posed an immediate threat to the rights and freedoms of ordinary citizens. The number has gone up since then. In 2004, it was 35%. In 2005, it was 37%. In 2006, it was 44%. So it's only changed 5 percentage points since 2006, but they did not ask the question between 2006 and 2010. One thing that's very interesting is that when they asked the question in 2010, and they do have a breakdown here by political party, the party that is in charge, or rather people that self-identify as being members of or supporters of the party in charge, well, they then wind up thinking the opposite of what they did when the other party was in charge. In 2006, 59% of Democrats, and you may recall in 2006, there was, that's right, a Republican president. In 2006, 59% of Democrats answered yes to the question, do you think the federal government poses an immediate threat to the rights and freedoms of ordinary citizens? And in 2010, with a Democrat in the White House, 26% of Democrats. So a 33% change. And the only thing that really changed was the puppet in the White House. But yet 33% of Democrats changed their answer on this question. By comparison, in 2006, 24% of Republicans agreed that the federal government poses an immediate threat to the rights and freedoms of ordinary citizens. Meanwhile, 4 years later, and a Democrat puppet in the White House instead of a Republican puppet, and 63% of Republicans answered yes to the question. Just something that I find to be very interesting. And when you look at this survey in conjunction with the other survey, is it possible that only 10% of Americans that say the federal government does not pose an immediate threat to the rights and freedoms of ordinary citizens do not want a wall? Is it possible that some of the people that think that the federal government does pose a threat to the rights and freedoms of ordinary citizens want a wall? So it's one of those things of, if they could somehow do these surveys in conjunction with one another and then give you a breakdown of, here's how many people that said this, also said this, that also said this. But I understand that it's very difficult to wind up doing that, especially when you're looking at one survey done by Bloomberg, another done by Gallup. I've seen surveys done by Reuters that showed somewhere up to 65% of Americans say that the federal government does not have the consent of the governed. So, it's interesting looking at these surveys and statistics, but I don't really think you can extrapolate much beyond just hypothesizing on some of this. But nonetheless, I find it to be very interesting, and I'll post the link in the show notes. You can read the entire survey at your leisure. Now, speaking of governments being a immediate threat to the rights and freedoms of ordinary people, I want to close the show this week telling you about a man who, well, he found out just how much of a threat the government was to his life. The story comes from Reason.com, and it's about a man from Roseville, Michigan, who, well, his family is now suing the county. Macomb County, Michigan, is being sued because David Stovyeski, and I hope I'm pronouncing that right, he was 32 years old from Roseville, Michigan. He was arrested for having an unpaid fine stemming from careless driving. Had an unpaid $772 fine stemming from careless driving. He was incarcerated, sentenced to serve 30 days in jail for refusal or inability to pay the fine. And Reason reports over the next 17 days of his incarceration in a brightly lit cell where he was denied clothing, he lost 50 pounds, suffered convulsions, and eventually began to hallucinate. He died in agony from a combination of obvious untreated drug withdrawal and galling neglect. Making matters worse, if anything could be worse than that, the entirety of his demise was captured on jail surveillance footage. Indeed, Stovyeski was under self-harm watch stemming from a misdiagnosis of his condition, which was drug addiction, not mental instability, and jail officials were supposed to be watching him constantly. Either their vigilance was inadequate or they watched and simply did not care. WDIV from Detroit reports on the story, and Reason says it is a must-see, even though it is highly disturbing. They link over to that, as will I, in the show notes. The video clip shows clips from the jail footage while a medical expert offers commentary on the inhumanity of his treatment. He was a drug addict and was taking methadone, Xanax, and Klonopin to treat his addiction. But without access to these prescriptions, he quickly went into withdrawals while in jail. According to WDIV's experts, withdrawal caused him to behave irrationally But jail officials ignored these obvious symptoms and instead placed him in a cell for the mentally unstable. He was stripped naked so that he could not hurt himself. This link will be in the show notes. Don't forget, every Wednesday I answer your questions. AMA at FPPradio.com.